Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni maliwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are so delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is the author of 37 books. He's a Newbery Award winner. He's here to celebrate his latest middle grade novel. It's called Dead Wednesday. Please welcome to the show, Jerry Spinelli. Jerry, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you, Jed. My pleasure. As it turns out, you're actually launching the virtual book tour for Dead Wednesday. So don't let anybody tell you were anything other than number one.
Oh, well, we love that. We love that. I've been called a lot of other things in my life. It's nice to be number one.
Me too.
So tell us about Dead Wednesday.
In one sense, I wish there was more to tell, and you'll understand what I mean by that in a second. I got the idea in a letter from a teacher. For some reason, it's in my memory that it came from Texas, but I'm not sure about that. I just know that she wrote to me. Her letter got to me at my home, and I kept it in my in a particular file folder for years. And I think we can all agree that Dead Wednesday is a pretty memorable phrase. And so that stayed with me. But that was about all. And as has too often been the case with me, with other stories as well, something sits with me for way too long before I have the good sense to realize that what I'm sitting on is a great story. So finally, after about 10 or 15 years, it occurs to me, whoa, Dead Wednesday, there might be a book there. And so I went looking for that teacher's letter because I knew she gave me more details about it. The only thing I remembered was that a day at her middle school was called Dead Wednesday, and that it had to do with all the kids on a certain day during their 8th grade year playing dead for one day. I believe it involved identifying themselves somehow, perhaps with a black shirt or something like that. And for that day in school, all the 8th graders were ignored by the other students and by the teachers. In other words, they were invisible. They were dead. And each one of them was not dead anonymously. He or she was dead because she had been given the name of a kid, presumably in that state, I guess, who had died that previous year from avoidable circumstances. For example, drugs, drinking and driving, reckless behavior, things like that. The kind of thing that the middle school people were trying to steer these incipient high schoolers, these 8th graders, away from, because they knew the temptations and so forth that they were about to face once they jumped into high school. And this was their last-ditch attempt to scare them into staying straight and being sensible and not being reckless and not being stupid. That's the gist of what I recalled. and I desperately wanted to get more details about it. And I'll be darned, I searched this place. You can see my office behind me, up and down, and I could not find her letter, which, among other things, is regrettable because, as you will see in the book, when I get around to the thank yous, I have no named thank you for the person who gave me the idea. I do at least, and I wonder if she'll ever see it. I do at least thank the unknown teacher who sent me a letter and gave me the title. But that's the best I could do in terms of acknowledging her. So that's what I was left with, and beyond that, I did what I guess a storyteller does. I took a good title and the neat germ of an idea, and cooked up a story to go with it, and that's my story.
Wow! What a powerful lesson for a school to give kids. As you were talking about it, at first I'm like, what are they thinking? But then it makes perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Wow. So and hats off to that teacher, whoever he or she is.
Exactly.
It's amazing how you always talk about how little acts of kindness can have big effects, and it's amazing sometimes how we can drop a little seed of an idea into certain people's mind, and it grows. Yeah.
And if I can make a little writer's lesson out of this, obviously, I always get the question, do you have any advice for young writers and so forth? And I always, I do have a golden rule, but it's not this. I always say that the very first step in writing is not writing at all. It is simply opening your eyes, opening your ears, and paying attention. You pay attention. And that's the beginning of it all. You pay attention. You notice the stuff. Unspectacular. No lightning bolts coming down from heaven. No inspiring sunrises. There's little things going on all around you every ordinary quotidian day that most people overlook. You want to be a writer, you don't overlook it. You notice every little thing you can. And that becomes treasures in your attic, in your head. And that gives you a starting place. That gives you your material. It doesn't have to be particularly dramatic. It can be something no more than a letter from a teacher in Texas. Or in the case, just to take an example, of my book called There's a Girl in My Hammerlock, about a girl on a boys wrestling team. And how did that start? Simply by paging through the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper. I live near there, and seeing a picture that immediately struck me as unusual, because it shows a girl in a bathing suit standing on a scale in a boys' locker room with a bunch of boys and an adult who's apparently a coach standing there staring at the scale. And then I read the caption and found out what was going on. It was, as always happens with wrestling teams, this was the weigh-in before a wrestling meet. And who's on the scale instead of the expected boy, a girl. And that's all I needed for that. And out of that photograph came, There's a Girl in My Hammerlock, out of a simple recollection of a schoolyard chant. I don't know if you ever said this or not when you were in 6th grade during recess, but we did. first grade babies, second grade cats, third grade angels, fourth grade rats. And again, just like with Dead Wednesday, decades went by before it occurred to me. Fourth grade rats. That's a title.
Mm.
And so I just wrote the title down. Had no idea what was going to go with it, but I had the title, and so I wrote it down in cursive on a piece of yellow paper, and then stopped for about a week to cook up a story to go along with the title. And once I did, I wrote it off in about a month.
Wow.
And it sold over 1 million, I believe. Ideas can come from anywhere if you're paying attention, if you're remembering. My standard answer to one of the most common questions, where do ideas come from, is everyday life, which I already mentioned, memories,
mm-hmm.
which I just mentioned, and for want of a better word, and I dare you to come up with the words of of a definition that are wonderful for everybody. Imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Those three ingredients, I would say, cover most of what you would find in my books and probably in any novel.
Yeah. You know,
Sorry to be so long-winded.
No. This is, I feel like I'm in a master class. This is one of the wonderful things I love about doing this podcast is I get a chance to speak with experts and pick their brains. And you're the second master writer that has mentioned that writing technique of paying attention. Jane Yolen. Jane Yolen, who's written 400
a friend
books.
of mine.
Yeah, and she said the same thing. Open up your eyes and your ears and just notice everything around you.
Yes, and any writer worth his or her salt will tell you the same thing. We all say pretty much the same things because we all learn the same lessons. Mm-hmm. We all teach ourselves. It took me 5 books to do it. The first 4 books that I wrote, nobody wanted. I spent 15 years making not even a nickel in terms of being able to pay the bills. But I wrote 4 novels that nobody wanted. But I suspect, looking back, that it was those 4 novels that failed that were actually amounted to my writing education. Mm-hmm. And if I had not written those 4 failures, I would not have arrived at my refrigerator one morning with all the 6 sleeping angels still upstairs because I'm up early and ready to go to work and reaching into the refrigerator to get my lunch to take to work that day. And I pull out the brown paper bag that has my fried chicken in, and I open it to take a look, and what I find is chicken bones but no meat on them. One of those 6 sleeping angels upstairs the night before had snuck into the refrigerator, eaten all the meat off of my chicken bones, put the bones back in the bag, and put the bag back in the refrigerator, as if I would never notice. I went to work that day, fried chickenless, and by 3 hours later, by the time lunchtime came, I closed my office door, and I began to write the words that now appear on page 1 of the novel called Space Station 7th Grade. I had no idea that I was just beginning to write what was going to become my 5th book, much less any idea that I was just beginning to write what would become my first published book. Mm-hmm. And it begins, and here was and I'll bet every writer has stories like this. As I was sitting down again with yellow paper to write on it longhand to start this story, simply because I was still mad about what happened. And so because I was worked up and passionate, that goes into writing, as you know. Mm-hmm. So I had my ballpoint pen. Here's one. My ballpoint pen was literally poised above the paper, and I was ready to start writing in the way that you or anybody else would naturally tend to do. That is, from your own point of view. Mm-hmm. And I was about to do that. And since I was an adult or grown up, that would be from the father's point of view. And I was about to start writing it from the father's point of view. Don't ask. This is an example of the muse. I've been visited by 2 documented times by the muse. So I believe it's something that is real. Mm-hmm. And the first time was that day in my office at lunch. And I wasn't asking for it. It just came to me. It just flopped into my lap. Wait a minute. There's a more interesting point of view here. The point of view of the kid who took the fried chicken. Once it occurs to you, it's a no-brainer. I slapped myself. Mm-hmm. Oh, my God. And so I started writing from the kid's point of view. One by one, my father put the bones on the chicken table. Put the bones on the table. They were chicken bones. There was nothing but bones, no meat. Why was this happening? Why did he drag me downstairs into the kitchen out of my bed in the middle of my summer vacation to make me stare at a row of chicken bones? That's basically the first paragraph of my first published book, and I wrote those words on my work desk with the door closed during lunch that day, having no idea that a year and a half later, Space Station 7th Grade would come out as my first book, which I didn't call that. I called it Stuff. Mm-hmm. But my editor didn't like that title. Don't ask me why. I still wish it was called that. But he gave it another title, Space Station 7th Grade. And why should I complain? 35 years later, it's still in print. So there you go, another long-winded answer.
We love them. But I think that's even as you were talking, I've told the audience here too many times that I've been presenting educational magic shows at schools throughout the country for years and years and years. And there have been amazing things that have happened to me on stage, and those are stories that I've told. But as you were talking, if I were to tell those same stories, not from my point of view, but from the point of view of the kids who were involved, that would be a completely different story. And
totally different. Yeah. Totally different.
Yeah.
Yes.
What great advice for a writer, for a parent who's listening, who we hope will check out Dead Wednesday and read with their kids. But that's great advice to talk and share with our kids is, telling a story and getting into the discipline, getting into the habit of not only telling a story from somebody else's point of view, but looking at life through someone else's point of view. What a great way to develop empathy.
Yes. And that's one reason why I'm glad I decided to be a writer, because even though it's a kind of a sedentary, solitary occupation, it can be, in that sense, even lonely. Mm-hmm. You do it by yourself. Like I'm sitting here. There's nobody else around, nobody else in the house at the moment. You're alone, you and your story. But my golden rule for kids, for young writers, I break it down because as you know, we writers can get verbose and talking on forever and give you so many rules. writing rules that you work yourself into a pretzel, trying to follow them all. So I like to boil it down. Whenever I'm asked, do you have any advice for writers? I boil it down to one short, simple sentence. And I think everything proceeds from there. And that is, write what you care about. That's my golden rule. That's my advice. I don't say any more than that. And when I write it down, I underline the word care, or put it in all caps. And when I say it, I try to say it in all caps. Write what you care about, for a very simple reason. Look, what are you trying to do? You're not writing in a closet. You're not writing for your cat. You're writing for somebody to read it. What do you want to do? Well, you want to touch that person, right? You want to touch that person. You want your story to reach into that person's chest and squeeze the heart. That's your goal. I think it's safe to say that's the goal of every writer who ever wrote. Mm-hmm. In other words, you want to make the reader care. You want to make the reader care about your story, about your characters, about your message, about the whole thing. Okay? How are you going to make them care if you don't? Mm-hmm. And so writing what you care about helps to accomplish that. And furthermore, it will probably draw out of you your best writing. It won't necessarily draw out of you your best spelling or punctuation or neat margins and so forth. But it's going to draw out of you, if you're writing what you are passionate about, what you care about, if that's what you're basing your story on, you're going to produce your best writing. And so anybody who wants to know how to start, I'd just say write the numbers 1 to 10 on a piece of paper, and then list 1 to 10 things you care about, and bam, there's your life's work right there.
That's brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah.
One of the things that I read in answer to some questions that kids ask you is that you find that writing is a way to complete experiences. Do I have that right?
Boy, you sure do. Did you happen to read Knots in My Yo-Yo String?
I did not.
Okay, because I think I quote just that, and that's my memoir of growing up as a kid. That's why I asked you that. So you must have got that from some talk I gave or something. Yeah. That's kind of how it's kind of an answer to another common question. Incidentally, if you ever wondered, I've mentioned this a couple of times, the common questions I'm asked, and I'm waiting for you to ask me what's the most common question, and you haven't yet, and I'm not sure you will, so I'm going to tell you. The most common question that I get, and I'm betting a lot of writers would say this, and of course I'm talking school kids, a school audience. How much money do you make? That is the most common question I get, especially back in the days when I was spending more of my time visiting schools. But beyond that, I'm forgetting the question now. I just it all.
I was just, I'd asked you about your quote about writing is a way to finish experiences.
Yes. And I think I discovered that maybe with my first published thing, which was a poem about a football game. I was 16. I was in high school. I was on the soccer team, so I was not on the field at the time, but I went to every football game, and we were playing literally one of the best teams in the country. And we were leading 7-6 when one of their players we're leading 7-0 when one of their players, 7-6, when one of their players got loose, made it all the way down to the 1-yard line. So they had first and goal to go on the 1. In other words, 4 tries to make 36 inches, and we held them on the 1-yard line. And that epic goal line stand just turned my town of Norristown upside down. While everybody else was cheering, kicking cans, yelling, screaming, setting off fireworks, I went home and wrote a poem about that goal line stand. Wrote it out longhand, showed it to my father the next day, forgot about it. A couple days later, also forgetting that my father was friends with the sports editor of the local newspaper, I opened the Norristown Times-Herald and see in a box in the middle of the page my poem.
Oh, wow.
16-year-old Jerry Spinelli took pen to paper after Friday night's incredible goal line stand and penned his thoughts. And what I was doing, and what in retrospect I realized I was doing, and that I now know that is a foundation for why I write, is that in writing that poem, I was completing the experience for myself. Other people completed their experiences by going crazy, yelling, screaming. I completed it by going home and writing about it. And when I got to the last line and finished my poem, and that poem can be found in its entirety in my memoir, Knots in My Yo-Yo String. When I got to the last line of that, writing it, for me, the event was then finalized. The event was then a complete. And I'm just saying that's how it works for me. I don't know about anybody else.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Now, I don't ever ask an author how much money they make writing, because I think it's either going to break my heart or it's going to depress people.
Exactly.
But one of the questions I do often ask authors is, what kind of conversations can families have if they experience an author's book together? And I'm imagining Dead Wednesday would be a great book for families to co-read together, or and co-read and talk about over the dinner table, or listen to together on the way to soccer practice or ballet or school through the audio version. So, what do you think? What kind of conversations do you think families can have about Dead Wednesday?
And there will be an audio version. I have learned recently. Not to mention film interest.
Oh.
I don't know, Jed. A question like that a little bit resembles when teachers come up to me and say something like, "How would you like me to teach your book?" And what I tell them is, "Listen, I'm the writer. I write the story. Beyond that, the teaching is your job. I would say to you, the reading is your job. Mm-hmm. The thinking about is your job. The discussing is your job. But in the interest of avoiding your question, I would like to think that there are things to be discussed, plenty to be discussed in this story. It's not an accident that I start off quoting, I believe it's Emily Dickinson, and something to the effect that one thing that makes life so precious is that it only comes once. That's a pretty good paraphrase, and that launches me into the character that we know as Worm. His nickname, his name in his family is Robbie, with the name that he is given on his 8th grade Dead Wednesday. and what happens in the relationship between himself and that name, that, as she calls herself, spectral maiden, who did make a mistake and did pay for it, and spends a day, Dead Wednesday, with Worm, and the consequences for both of them.
That is a pretty powerful conversation, I think, and I think it's something that every family needs to have. It's hard. It's really hard. Thankfully, with a book like Dead Wednesday, it's kind of easier to get into it than sitting down with your kids and saying, "Okay, kids, now we have to talk about this."
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
And the beauty of writers like you that are writing great kids books is that those conversations that we need to have with our kids when they're in middle school, so that they don't make the dumb decisions that could lead to them leaving us. Those conversations begin when they're babies on our laps, reading those board books, or when the kids are eating the board books, and continuing to read and talk about our kids with what they're reading, all the way through middle school and high school. And
yes. As one of the biggest pillars in the kids' book world, Jim Trelease wrote, in fact, a book called The Read Aloud Handbook. And he and many others are a proponent, an advocate for what you just said, reading aloud. It's been my experience when I was visiting schools more, I'd be up on stage looking at a row of 8th and 9th grade kids slouching in the front row, and by the time I was finished reading, they were all up and paying attention. You're never too old to be read to. Don't think of it as a little kiddie thing. Yes, you're never beyond the age by which a story can reach you. My favorite quote comes from a poet, Muriel Rukeyser, and she said, either said or wrote, "The universe is not made of atoms, but of stories." Only devoted writers and readers can understand that and agree with it. But to me, it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. This has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so thankful that we've been able to spend this time together. I know people are going to want to know where they can find out more about you and find out more about Dead Wednesday.
Oh, sure. I should mention in passing that the next thing I'm going to be doing, and I don't do much of this anymore, I'll be doing a Zoom workshop for the California children's California for the Pacific Coast Children's Writers Conference coming up in early October. You could check that out. You could check out my website at Jerry Spinelli author.com and find out about my books and so forth. When I can be persuaded, occasionally I'll post on Facebook or Twitter. I was especially in the run-up to the Disney filming of Stargirl, which is now playing on Disney Plus. I was persuaded to jump into social media, and so I got a grandkid to sign me up for Facebook and Twitter. And so I'm on there, and I post maybe about twice a year. That's how active I am. But I, if I haven't yet done so, I will have to at least say something about Dead Wednesday coming now. Marketing is not my strong suit. What I do is write. I'm happy to let other people beat the drums.
Well, I think we've had a lot of indie and self-published authors on the program who are looking forward to the day when they can say that.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm rooting for all of them.
Yeah, well, you've certainly shared some great wisdom that writers can take away and really help. It's wisdom that can help them improve their writing. And I think it's great wisdom that we can, as parents, share with our kids. Because all of the things that you've talked about, just being aware, notice everything, write or think about stories from the perspective of somebody else. Those are great skills that can serve our kids in whatever they do in life.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. We've had a really fun time speaking to the author of Dead Wednesday, the latest middle grade novel from Newbery Award winner Jerry Spinelli. Jerry, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Jed, thank you. And since you've been throwing so many nice compliments my way, let me throw one your way. I've had the good fortune to be interviewed many times, but I don't think any occasion has been better than this, and I want to thank you.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It'll be another Protecting the Planet with Your Kids episode. This episode starring Krista Amampato. She's going to be talking to us about choices we can make to help create a more sustainable world. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Right now, I'd like to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Jerry Spinelli. Please be sure to check out Dead Wednesday. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Helen Frazier, Justina Thompson. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.